Dealing with serious bacterial infections, it's always been a challenge, hasn't it? Especially now, with resistance being such a huge issue.
Absolutely. It's a constant balancing act.
And that balance is perfectly illustrated by the drugs we're looking at today, the aminoglycosides. We're going to dive deep into what they are, how they actually work, and importantly, why using them requires some careful thought.
Exactly. We're drawing on medical textbook sources here, so this is pretty detailed, authoritative stuff. We'll unpack how they hit bacteria hard, but also why they're not always the go-to drug anymore.
Right. So our mission, yours and ours, is to pull out the really key information about these powerful medications. Make it clear, make it stick. Maybe you're prepping for a discussion. Maybe you're just curious. Maybe you're in the field. Whatever the reason, we'll get you the core insights without drowning you in jargon.
That's good.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What exactly are aminoglycosides?
Well, fundamentally, they're a class of antibiotics. Their main job is fighting infections caused by specific bacteria, aerobic gram-negative bacilli. Think bacteria that need oxygen.
Aerobic, right. Got it. But you mentioned they aren't always the first choice.
That's right. Over time, newer drugs have come along, often with fewer harsh side effects. So aminoglycosides have become a bit more specialized.
Specialized how? Like for tougher cases?
Yeah, often for infections where other antibiotics might not work, maybe due to resistance. You'll see names like amikacin, gentamicin, tobramycin. Those are common ones. Also neomycin, streptomycin, plasmamycin. The text also mentioned paramomycin, but that's mostly used for something different, intestinal amoebiasis, so we'll probably leave that aside for now.
Okay. So a specific group for specific, often tough bacterial targets. How do they actually, win the fight? What's the science? You said they hit hard.
They do. They're bactericidal. That means they don't just stop bacteria from multiplying, they actually kill them.
Kill them, right. Okay.
Yeah. Their main mechanism is messing with protein synthesis in the bacteria they target. Think E. coli, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, some common nasty bugs.
Protein synthesis.
Oh.
Like the bacteria's building blocks.
Exactly. Bacteria need to build proteins constantly to function, repair, and multiply. Aminoglycosides latch on to the bacteria's ribosomes, the protein-building machinery.
Okay.
And crucially, they bind irreversibly. This causes the ribosome to misread the genetic instructions, the mRNA.
So it builds the proteins wrong.
Totally wrong. It churns out garbage proteins that are useless or even harmful to the bacterium. The whole system breaks down and the bacterial cell dies. That irreversible binding is really key.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty definitive way to stop an infection. So once you decide to use them, how do they get into the system? How does the body handle them?
Right. Pharmacokinetics. Well, first off, they're generally not absorbed well if you take them by mouth, like a pill. Not for systemic infections, anyway.
So no pills.
Usually not for getting the drug throughout the body. That's why they're often given as an injection, intramuscularly, IM. After an IM shot, they get absorbed pretty quickly. Peak levels in the blood usually within an hour or so.
Okay, fast acting then. And how long do they stick around?
Their half-life is relatively short, typically around 2 to 3 hours on average. They spread out quite well into different body fluids and tissues. And this is important. They do cross the placenta during pregnancy, and they can get into breast milk.
Okay, that's definitely something to bear in mind. How does the body get rid of them?
Primarily through the kidneys. They're mostly excreted just as they are unchanged in the urine.
Kidneys again. That seems important. I think the source mentioned gentamicin comes in different forms.
Yes, gentamicin is a good example of their versatility in formulation. You can get it as eye drops, topical creams for the skin, and then the injectable forms, IV or IM. And sometimes for specific things like certain central nervous system infections, it can even be given intrathecally.
Intrathecally?
Meaning?
Directly into the spinal fluid.
Ah, okay. So, very targeted, right? We've got these potent bacteria killers, different ways to deliver them. But we started off saying, use with caution. Why? What are the risks we need to talk about?
Yeah, this is really central to understanding aminoglycosides. They work, but they carry significant risks. The textbooks really emphasize weighing the benefits against these potential harms, especially in certain people.
Like who?
Well, obviously anyone with a known allergy, but also critically, people with pre-existing kidney disease.
Because they're cleared by the kidneys.
Exactly. If your kidneys aren't working well, the drug can build up, increasing the risk of toxicity. Also, people with pre-existing hearing loss are a concern.
Why hearing loss?
Because these drugs can damage the auditory nerve ototoxicity. It can make existing hearing problems much worse. And there are also conditions like myasthenia gravis or Parkinsonism.
What's the issue there?
Aminoglycosides can sometimes interfere with neuromuscular transmission, potentially making muscle weakness worse in those conditions. Okay, that's quite a list already. What about pregnancy? You mentioned they cross the placenta.
Definitely a situation for caution. Because they cross over, there's a risk to the fetus. Streptomycin, in particular, has been linked to deafness in babies born to mothers who received it during pregnancy. That's a serious outcome.
Absolutely. So it sounds like if someone is getting these drugs, they need to be watched very closely.
Very closely. Frequent monitoring is key. Checking kidney function regularly, sometimes measuring the actual level of the drug in the blood. This is especially true for anyone with impaired kidneys.
And the two big words that keep coming up seem to be nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity. Kidney damage and ear damage.
Precisely. Those are the major toxicities associated with aminoglycosides. Nephrotoxicity is kidney damage. Ototoxicity affects hearing and sometimes balance. This potential for serious harm is why they're often held back for resistant infections and usually used for shorter periods if possible.
Is the damage permanent?
Well, the kidney damage, the nephrotoxicity, is often reversible if you catch it early and stop the drug. The kidneys can recover, but the ototoxicity, the hearing or balance damage, that can unfortunately be permanent.
Irreversible hearing loss. Wow. Okay. And streptomycin, you mentioned earlier, is used even less now.
Yeah, streptomycin has a particularly high risk of toxicity to the 8th cranial nerve, the hearing and balance nerve, and the kidneys. So while it's still important for things like multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis, it's really reserved for special situations where other options won't work.
And the source mentioned a boxed warning. That sounds serious.
It is. That's the strongest warning regulators issue. It's there specifically to alert doctors and pharmacists about these major risks, ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. It's not subtle.
No, clearly not.
Yeah.
Are there other side effects besides the big two? Effects on the nervous system, maybe?
Yes. Beyond hearing and balance, they can cause other CNS issues. Things like confusion, sometimes depression, disorientation, even numbness or tingling, muscle weakness. It relates to their effects on nerve function generally.
Okay. And the kidney damage, can we unpack that a bit more? How does it actually happen?
Sure. The drug directly damages parts of the kidney's filtering units, the glomerulus and the tubules. They're responsible for cleaning the blood. Aminoglycosides can injure those cells.
But you said it's often reversible.
Often, yes. Unlike the potential permanence of the ototoxicity, if the drug is stopped, the kidneys frequently have a good capacity to heal over time. That's a really important distinction.
Definitely. What about effects elsewhere, like on blood cells?
Bone marrow depression can happen. It's less common, but the drugs can affect the rapidly dividing cells in the bone marrow where blood cells are made. This could potentially lower blood counts, maybe weaken the immune response a bit.
And I guess more common things like stomach issues.
Oh, yes. GI effects are pretty common. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, maybe loss of appetite, sometimes sores in the mouth, stomatitis. This can be from direct irritation or messing up the normal gut bacteria or direct toxic effects on the lining of the digestive tract.
So they really can affect multiple systems. Anything else? Heart, skin.
Yeah, cardiac effects like palpitations or changes in blood pressure, both low and high, have been reported. And like almost any drug, you can get hypersensitivity or allergic reactions. That could be a rash, hives, purpura, or sometimes more severe skin reactions.
Okay, it's a complex picture. They're clearly powerful but come with baggage. What about using them with other drugs? Do they play well with others?
That's another critical area. Interestingly, there's a positive interaction sometimes. Aminoglycosides can work synergistically with penicillins or cephalosporins against certain bacteria.
Synergistically, meaning?
Meaning the combination is more effective at killing the bacteria than either drug would be on its own. It's a strategy used intentionally in some serious infections.
Okay, so that's a good interaction. What about bad ones to avoid?
Definitely. A big one is combining them with loop diuretics like furosemide or Lasix. That combination significantly increases the risk of ototoxicity, the hearing damage. That's a major no-no if you can avoid it.
Right, avoid that combo. What else?
Also, you need to be really careful giving them alongside other drugs that are also known to be tough on the kidneys. Other nephrotoxic drugs, like vancomycin, for instance, the kidney toxicity can add up.
Cumulative damage. Makes sense. Any interactions relevant to say, surgery?
Yes, very important. If given with certain anesthetics or muscle relaxants used during surgery, like non-depolarizing neuromuscular blockers or succinylcholine, or even with citrate and transfused blood, aminoglycosides can increase the neuromuscular blockade.
Meaning the muscle relaxation lasts longer.
Exactly. It could lead to prolonged muscle weakness or even breathing problems after surgery. Paralysis, potentially.
Whoa. Okay, so communication is key there.
Absolutely critical. The surgical team needs to know if a patient has recently received an aminoglycoside. They might need extended monitoring afterwards.
Really highlights the need for everyone to be on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay, let's drill down on one example. Gentamicin is often mentioned as the prototype. What are the absolute key points for gentamicin?
Right. Gentamicin is sort of the classic aminoglycoside. Its main job, like the others, is treating serious infections caused by susceptible bacteria.
And its action.
Same mechanism. Inhibits protein synthesis, messes up the bacterial cell membrane, leads to cell death, bactericidal.
How it moves through the body, pharmacokinetics.
Pretty standard for the class. Quick onset if given IM or IV, peaks in the blood in about 30 to 90 minutes, half-life around 2-3 hours, excreted by the kidneys, mostly unchanged.
And the main adverse effects to flag for gentamicin specifically.
Well, you can see things like hypersensitivity, maybe sinusitis, dizziness, rash, fever. But again, the big headlines, the ones highlighted in the warnings, are the risk of nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity, kidney and ear damage. Same core risks as the class.
Okay. So pulling this all together then, if we had to summarize the absolute essence of aminoglycosides.
I'd say powerful bactericidal antibiotics, really important for certain serious gram-negative infections. But they come with significant risks, especially to kidneys and hearing. So careful patient selection, careful monitoring, and often reserved for situations where other drugs aren't suitable.
So life-saving in some cases, but definitely not something to use lightly.
Exactly. Their role has shifted a bit as newer, often safer alternatives have become available, but they remain crucial tools in the toolbox, particularly when dealing with resistant bugs.
It really does show the trade-off in medicine power versus potential harm. So here's something for you, our listener, to chew on. With antibiotic resistance becoming an even bigger threat, how might we need to think about using these older, potentially more toxic drugs like aminoglycosides in the future when options become scarce? How do we weigh that effectiveness against the very real risk of serious side effects? What are those difficult choices going to look like down the road? Something to think about.